Hello, friends, it's Shari. Today I have a magical book inspired card to share with you. So, this is, of course, inspired by the Harry Potter stories, and you can see all of my die cuts here. I'm using Build a Fox for my character today, but I am going to be creating a wolf. I'm also using the new Build a Critter graduation accessories for the robe. I also have some accessories here like the wand and the broom from the Build a Critter costumes. I'm also going to be using the new Workshop Backdrops portrait for my little scene. I've already cut out two of the little shelves, but I'm going to cut out the whole backdrop here in a minute. And then I pulled in some elements from the bookmark die, which is these tiny books. I also have the plant with the pot, but then I cut out an actual flower pot from the Build a Wheelbarrow set so that I can make a cute little mandrake for one of the shelves. And then in addition to my die cuts, I am going to use a few stamped images. This tiny frog from the Capybaras add-on. There is a cute little snail in the Porcupine for You that I'm going to use. I am going to stamp out the mushrooms, but I did not end up using them on my card. And then, of course, finally, I wanted a snowy owl, so I pulled out critters in the Arctic for a perfect little snowy owl. Now for the basis of my scene, I am cutting the workshop backdrop portrait from Storm Cloud cardstock. I've already cut the two little shelves from some chocolate bar cardstock, but I want the frame to be that dark gray. So this is what it looks like. I'm just going to discard the pegboard because I don't want that for my card today, but I will layer these brown shelves over top so we get the look of wooden shelves on the wall. For my images, I am stamping these with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on white cardstock so that I can color them with my alcohol markers. And I'm just doing some simple coloring today. Now, I don't want super bright colors on this card, so I've pulled out some darker greens. This is not usually the shades I would use for a frog, but I want this to have that kind of dark, magical feel. Same for my snail, which I am notorious for coloring purple. This one is kind of more of a dark red color, and then I'll pull in a darker tan color for the body. Now, as I said before, I did not end up using the mushrooms, but I left the coloring in case you wanted to see the colors that I was going to use. So I have a dark red for the tops of the mushrooms. I did not even do any shading because the red is so dark. And then I'm pulling in some darker tan colors for the spots and the stems. For my owl, I went with neutral grays, so I'm going in with an N3 for the darker color. I'm going to blend out with an N1 and then just pull some of that N1 along the belly, along the bottom and the side. The center there, I'm leaving white. And then just a very pale brown, an E000 around the eyes. Then, of course, we cannot forget the beak, and I think that is a perfect little snowy owl. So I'll use the coordinating dies for all of these stamped images and die cut them out, and then we're just going to set these aside until we're ready to assemble our card. Now for my background, I decided to get really inky. So I have Blueprint Sketch Distress ink here and a piece of distress watercolor paper. I just smushed that onto my glass mat, added a bunch of water, and I'm going to start to build up the color on this background. I'm also using Uncharted Mariner and Wilted Violet as I add my color to my background. I am going to bring in my heat tool to dry this out in between layers. So this is just a very basic, very light layer. Obviously, we're going to make this a whole lot darker. But then I flipped it over and started picking up some of that ink that was on my mat, drying in between my splotching it around on there. And I just started picking up all that ink, and you can really start to see those layers and that texture that it creates. Now I'm bringing in the Wilted Violet, and I'm going to add some water to that with my paintbrush as well, and my water bottle, and I'm just trying to break up that big blob of color. Then I started pulling it from the edges towards the center with my paintbrush to kind of fill in. I like all the colors, but I didn't want it super busy. So you're going to see me do that a couple times with my paintbrush. So I'm getting my darker, a little more drier splotches of that Uncharted Mariner, that's that darker blue. And then I'm picking up my very large brush and just pulling those colors in from the outside. Again, drying between the layers to get some cool looks. So I like the look of this now, and I pulled in some black soot distress ink and a blending tool, and I'm just adding some darkness to this. And I'll pull in my backdrop so I can kind of see what it's looking like. I do like those lighter areas there, so I'm going to keep those where the shelves are going to be. Then the next thing I wanted to do was add some shimmer. And this was a really fun technique. I wasn't sure how well it would work, but I'm getting this really wet on my glass mat and I'm going to grab a wide brush and it's actually dry. I didn't add any water to it. And I'm just going to sort of dry brush this gold across the panel. You can kind of see it at the top, but you're really going to see it when I pick it up and kind of show it in the light. And I just went all over with this panel. This really created a cool effect because when you pick it up, you get that shimmery shine from the gold, but you can still see those colors below it. And I'll just dry this panel completely before I add anything else to it. So now that it's dry, the final thing I wanted to add was some black watercolor splatters. So I'm just going to get some of that watercolor on my brush and just splatter that around for some texture. Then I will set this aside and let those splatters dry. Next, I wanted to work on the front piece and make it look a little older. So I have some Rusty Hinge Distress Oxide and a little foam tool, which is very old and started falling apart when I did this. So I threw this away after I was done. But I'm just adding some little areas of that rusty look. Then I have some black soot distress oxide, and I'm going to add some darker areas. Because I am putting this on a dark colored cardstock, I'm using the oxide because it is pigment and it's going to set on top of that dark colored cardstock. I'm not really concerning myself with the shelves since I'm going to cover those up. And then the last thing I did was I wanted that oxide ink to react with water. So I'm going to grab my spray bottle that is just clean water, hold it really far away, and spray some little splatters of water all over this. And then I will dry it. I will do this twice, and it's going to give me some fun texture, but it's very subtle where I put that oxide ink. Then I need to clean off this mess that I've made on my craft mat. And then the last thing I actually did to this background piece that's going to layer on top was add some of those same black watercolor splatters that I did to the background, which just gives it some really nice texture. I think that this really gives it the look that we're in some classroom in our magical castle. So I will put these both aside until they're completely dry. And once they're completely dry, I'm ready to add them to my card base. Now I am using a very sturdy card base. This is a 110-pound cardstock for the card base. And since this watercolor paper is kind of all warped from all the water, I'm going to use my double-sided tape to attach this to my card base. That way I know it is nice and stuck down. So I'm going around all four sides, and then I will put some pieces through the center as well. But this is nice, strong tape, so it's going to really help flatten this out onto my card. So I'll just line that up. There is a little bit of white showing on the edges, and I'm just going to take my really big scissors and trim that off, just so we don't have any of that show. It's especially obvious on a dark background like this, so that's why I want to trim it off. Now for my little shelves, I'm just going to cut off the piece that is the frame, so I just end up with just the shelf. And then I'm going to layer these right on top of the shelves of the background using some liquid glue. I thought about cutting the shelves off the background and just lining them up right on the edge, but I think this works just as well and it kind of gives them a little bit of dimension off that backdrop so that they're not quite in the same plane. Now, before I put this onto my background, I wanted to add some brads to the little holes on the bottom. I have a bunch of brads here in lots of different colors, and what I picked out was kind of one brassy looking brad and two silver looking brads. So these are all kind of dingy, but I like the look of one being a different color because I think that that would be pretty accurate for this little scene. And now I don't need to put one in that bottom right corner. I did get out 4 brads, but my little sentiment banner is going to go down here, so I don't want the bulk of that brad in that bottom corner. So I'm just going to do 3. So we have a brass one and then 2 dark pewter ones. Because I'm gluing this to this kind of textured background with all these layers of paint and ink, I'm using my liquid glue. That way I can shift it around, make sure it's in place, but that liquid glue is going to create a really nice bond. So I'm lining it up, then I'm going to take a block to lay on top of those little pieces of the frame and the shelves. On the bottom, I'm just kind of using my fingers to press them down, and then I'll let that dry. Now I need to assemble my wolf instead of a fox. I realized after the fact I probably could have cut the whole body out of this dolphin cardstock because once I put the robe on, you couldn't see the gray part of the body, but that's okay. So I added the little feet and the hands or the paws. I'm also adding this because in my mind, that's what you're going to see through the chest of the robe. But again, I could have just cut the whole body out of this because the robe came all the way down, covering the gray part of the legs. But regardless, this is how we're putting it together. So now I'm adding some glue to add the robe, which is just cut from black cardstock. And then I'll go ahead and do his face. So the gray part of this wolf is cut from narwhal, and actually I need to layer this onto the black first. I realized when the eyes don't line up, you realize what you did wrong. So we have the black behind the eyes, and then I can layer this over the dolphin piece to get that lighter color on his face. Then I'll add the nose on the very back, which is also cut from black. Now, before I add the head to the body, I need to make his scarf. So I cut the sash from the graduation accessories from number 2 pencil. I'm going to trim off those points on the end so we have flat ends like a scarf. I'm going to grab a red marker and make some stripes so we have a Gryffindor scarf. I like that you could make this whichever house you want. Personally, I'm a Hufflepuff, but since we have a very Professor Lupin type character, I went with a Gryffindor scarf for this one. And then I'm adding a little dot of glue to the back. That just goes right over that neck. I'm adding a couple dots so I can glue that scarf down, and I'll hold that with my tweezers and clean up that little bit of glue that kind of squished out there. I have a brand new glue bottle, so it is very generous right now. And then, of course, a little dot to hold his head on. And I'll just use my tweezers to kind of hold that while that glue sets. Then I can add the arms of the robe to the back. And I already added the little details to his paws, so I can just go ahead and add the arms to the back of the sleeves of the robe. Now I also have the little wand from the Build a Critter costumes, so I'll add that to one paw, and then I need to assemble my broom. So I'm adding the handle of the broom to the bottom of the broom. I'm not actually going to put that in his hand just yet. I wanted to wait till I got him on the card and could see kind of where I wanted it to be. And of course, we can't forget the little Harry Potter-esque glasses, which I just think are so cute. There are 2 sets of glasses in this die set, but of course the round ones I think are the cutest. And these glasses are very delicate little die cuts, so I just spread the glue with my fingers so it was very thin. I'm just cleaning up any little bits that might have squished out, and I will also use my adhesive eraser to clean up any residue from the glue, which works great. Next, I need to work on my mandrake. So I used the plant and the pot from the Stitch bookmark, but that pot is round, so I thought it would make the perfect little mandrake to go into another pot. So I'm adding the top cut from algae to the mandrake part that is cut from paper bag, and then I cut a flower pot using the Build a Wheelbarrow die set, and that is cut out of pumpkin cardstock. So I've just assembled that all together. I think it looks adorable. I'm adding some shading with a marker. just to kind of give that flower pot some shape and darken it up a little bit. I will also grab a brown marker and just add some shading to the mandrake root part so that it doesn't look so flat. Since I've added shading to the other parts, I'm just going to do a little bit on the leaves. And then finally, I need to give it its face. So I'm just going to have some little eyes and a little open mouth like it's trying to scream. And I just think it turned out so cute. Look at how cute that is. That's just going to sit up here on a shelf. And I'm going to start to fill in where I want all these elements on my scene. So I have some books. I have my snowy owl. I have a cute little frog. I have this little snail. Everything is coming together great. I decided not to add the mushrooms. I couldn't really figure out where I wanted them to be. But once I got these laying on here, I realized that the white outline from these stamped images was a little too bright for my dark scene. So I grabbed my antique linen distress ink and a little blending brush, and I am just going around all the edges and I'm just adding that darker color so it tones down that white a little bit and they really start to fit into the scene a lot better once I did that. So now they don't look so bright, and I think that works perfectly. Now for the sentiment, I pulled out the Dream Big stamp set because there is a sentiment in here that says have a magical day. I've actually cut mine apart here, so I just need to put it back together for this card. And I'm stamping it on a stitch sentiment banner that is cut from speckled eggshell cardstock. I am going to stamp this in the center. You could stamp it a little further to the left if you wanted, because I am going to trim off that fishtail end that's on the right. And I did go again with that antique linen distress ink and just kind of darken this up a little bit because at this point now it was like the brightest thing on my card. I'm using liquid glue to stick my sentiment banner down because I am gluing it over top of some of that distress oxide ink that I did on the background, and I want to make sure it sticks. Then I'm adding my cute little wolf with some foam squares, and for the broom I'll do the same. I'm adding one at the bottom. Then I will use my liquid glue to attach it to his paw and the very top just to the outside of my backdrop. Now I can go through and start to add all of my elements up on the bookshelves. For my owl, I did use some foam squares to kind of give that a little dimension. For everything else, I glued it directly to the background. So the little books that I used on my bookshelves, these are also from the Stitch Bookmark die. I just cut them out of different colors. I have all the Hogwarts houses represented in the colors of the books. And of course, my little snail. I need to trim off the outside edge of my sentiment banner. And then finally, I wanted to add some stars. These stars are also cut out of number 2 pencils, so they're not as bright as sunflower stars, but I use the Hearts and Stars skinny tag, so I have 3 different sizes. And then I'm adding my glitter to the stars, to the mandrake, to the books, the magic wand, and a little bit on the broom. And here is my finished magical book themed inspired card. I love that shimmer in the background. That background was so much fun to create, and I love combining all these dies and stamps to create this cute little scene. So I hope today's card has inspired you to look at those supplies a little differently and make something magical and fun. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.